Welcome to Year 8 Statistics, Lessons 3, Group Data. In this lesson, we're going to have a look at three different things. The first thing we're going to look at is this concept of group data. The next concept we're going to look at is how to build tally and frequency tables using group data. Then we're going to have a look at how to represent group data in the form of stem and leaf plots and then column graphs. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to give a verbal definition of what group data actually is. You should be able to determine whether data has been grouped or not. You should be able to construct and read tally and frequency tables for group data. And finally, you should be able to read and construct stem and leaf plots as well as column graphs. Now, first question is, what is grouped data? Now, group data is just a means of bunching data together. Now, the reason for this grouping might simply be because data doesn't necessarily make much sense if it's represented by itself. So when we're looking at categorical data or more specifically numerical data, sometimes it doesn't necessarily make sense to just have everything in its own individual little bar in a column graph. Sometimes it makes more sense to group certain numbers together or certain categories together so we can look at the bigger picture. So this is where group data comes into play. So group data is data that has been bunched together. This is because it can show more meaningful results when grouped together. Okay, so a bit of a vague definition there. Let's have a look at a bit of an example. So consider we've got some data here, and let's say it is the number of cars that have driven past Brighton over the course of 90 days between, let's say, 8:45 and 9 o'clock in the morning. So if we look at this individually, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense of what's going on, but rather maybe we want to be able to represent this in a way where we can have the numbers more closely related to one another, and then we can observe what trends are occurring. So one way in which we can do this is we can draw something called a stem and leaf plot. So a stem and leaf plot looks something like this. So over here we've got a number of different stem and leaf plots. This one's probably the nicest one. So effectively what we're doing is we're getting our data and we've got something called a stem and then something called a leaf. And what this permits us is a way of arranging our data such that we can see how the data or how it's all grouped out together, so the frequency. It's similar to a column graph, but we're using this as a means of grouping data together and see how the group all combines. Now, say for example in this data set we've got here, we can draw a stem and leaf plot using this data. So I'll get my ruler, and the first thing I'm going to do for a stem and leaf plot is I'm going to draw a vertical line. Now, on the left-hand side of the line, I'm going to write stem, and on the right-hand side of the line, I'm going to write leaf. Now, I have to have a look at the data on what I've got here. So, up in the data around here, notice that the lowest value we get is 3, and the highest value we get is 98. So what that tells us is all of our data is bunched between 0 and 100, or 0 and 99. Now, another another note to point out on this data is notice that it's ordered between ascending or descending to ascending order. So lowest to highest, so it's in ascending order, sorry. So what I'm going to do is, in the stem column, what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent the most significant figure in all of these numbers, and then in the leaf I'm going to represent the least significant. Now, for the first one, you have to take into consideration that there's a 0 in front of these guys here. So 3, 3, 4, there's a 0 as the most significant, and then we go 10. So because of that, I'm going to drop for my stem, I'm going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I need slightly more space. Okay. Now that I've got my stem populated, I can start doing my leaves. So notice for zeros, I've got 3, 3, 4. So I'm going to go 3, 3, 4. And notice how I'm using the spaces between, or I'm using the grids here to space out my numbers evenly. It's really important that you space your numbers out, or else the pattern that you observe when you're putting all the numbers together won't make sense. Now the next one is 10. So we've got rid of the 1 there because that's represented here. And then I just need to drop in the 0 there. And we've got 12, 15, 19. So 12, 15, 19. And then we go to 20. Okay, cool. So what I've done here is I've populated the entire stem and leaf plot using all of the data up here. Now, the final thing to finish off this stem and leaf plot is I need to put in a scale. So scale, and the way in which we put in the scale is we simply represent what the numbers mean. So I'm going to pick, let's say, we'll go the 3 and the 1, and I'll say 3, 1, and draw the bar like so. And then I'm going to say that equals 31. So what that means is that if you look at the 3 and the 3 over here and the 1, when you're reading this 3 and 1, it equates to 31. So just a way of showing the reader what you're trying to represent. Now, I know I said that was the final thing, but it's not quite the final thing. The final piece of information we want to put on this particular graph is a title. So this particular title, we'll call it stem and leaf representing number of cars. Okay. And that is how we construct a stem and leaf plot. Now remember, the advantage of this guy is that if we wanted to, we can get our pen and we can trace the shape of the data like so. So you don't do it a whole lot in year 8, but in year 9 and upwards, what you're going to look at is the shape of data. So the stem and leaf plot, it's just a nice way of, one, allowing you to group data together, and secondly, allowing you to observe the shape or the trends in the data. Okay, now next thing we're going to look at is the frequency or Italian frequency table, and using Italian frequency table, we're going to build a column graph. Now, similar to a stem and leaf plot, what we need to do is we need to put all of this data into a table, and then it'll allow us to sort the data. So I'm just going to input the data now. So notice I've got my class intervals here, so 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29. I simply populate my tally. So we'll go 3, 3, 4, so 3, 3, 4, 10, 12, 15, 19, so that's 4. Okay, so nice and easy. The data's been tallied. Now next thing is I need to do the frequency. So I just count the tally. And then finally, if we add all of these up, it's going to sum to a total of 40 days. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to build a column graph using the data that we see here. So that's simply going to be a case of how we've done it similarly to last time. Cool. Now, next thing I need to do is I need to sort out my bins. So this will be 0 to 9. Then the next one will be 10 to 19. Then we're going to go 20 to 21. 29 I should say. And then the final step is I just need to label the vertical. So I've gone up by spaces of 2 here just so I can space everything out. So next step is much like we did in the last lesson when we were building this column graph. We simply measure everything out. So 0 to 9, that was a frequency of 3. 10 to 19, that was a frequency of 4. And then we just got to name it. So we'll call this just passing traffic. Right, cool. So that's how we would use a column graph to represent group data that's already been grouped into a tally and frequency table. So in summary, what we've learned in this particular video is firstly, what is group data? We then had a look at we went down and had a look at how to do a stem and leaf plot. Then we went up and did some tally and frequency tables with group data, and finally a column graph from the tally and frequency table. Now, by now, you should be able to explain what group data is. You should be able to determine if data is grouped or not. You should be able to read and construct tally and frequency tables for group data, and you should be able to read and construct the stem and leaf plots as well as column graphs.